Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we sift through the sources, extract the most important insights, and deliver the knowledge straight to you.
We aim to make sure you're the most well-informed person in the room, fast but thoroughly.
Today, we are immersing ourselves in the unique mindscape of a contemporary literary giant, a writer who just refuses to stay put in any single genre.
Right?
He's a novelist whose settings range from, Nagasaki in the 1950s all the way to futuristic boarding schools and Arthurian Britain, often with just breathtaking ease.
We are doing a deep dive into the singular career of Sir Kazuo Ishiguro.
And it's such a compelling journey.
It really is. We're talking about a writer who is maybe the definition of a literary chameleon.
Yeah.
He's a Japanese-born British novelist who is also an acclaimed screenwriter and, get this, a Grammy-nominated jazz lyricist.
It's incredible. And his success isn't just in the awards, though there are plenty of those. It's his ability to shift the landscape of the novel while, consistently exploring one core, painful truth about the human condition.
And that's our mission today.
Exactly. To synthesize this incredible breadth of work, track his genre-bending style that manages to feel both classic and radically modern at the same time.
And to uncover the core emotional architecture that connects everything, from his very first novel to his most recent.
And the amazing thing is, we don't have to guess what that architecture is.
No, we don't. The Swedish Academy, when they gave him the 2017 Nobel Prize in Literature, they gave us the perfect thesis statement for his entire body of work.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately, because that Nobel citation, I think, is one of the most powerful and precise ever written.
It is a definitive statement. They called him a writer who, in novels of great emotional force, has uncovered the abyss beneath our illusory sense of connection with the world.
The abyss beneath our illusory sense of connection. That phrase, it just sets the thematic tone for everything that follows, doesn't it? It's about memory as a trickster, it's about failed ideals, and the elaborate, painful systems of self-deception we build just to survive.
It is. And our source material today provides a comprehensive chronological map of his life, his works, his influences, especially the musical ones, which are key, and all the extraordinary accolades he's earned.
So we're going to trace the steps from Nagasaki in 1954 all the way to the Nobel podium and beyond. Let's start at the beginning because his background is, I think, the most crucial element in understanding the distinctive flavor of his early career.
Absolutely.
Kazuo Ishiguro was born on November 8th, 1954 in Nagasaki, Japan, and then at the age of 5, everything changed.
That abrupt transition in 1960 is really the fault line that runs through his whole identity. He moved to Britain, settling in Guildford, Surrey.
And it wasn't a cultural choice, right? It was a professional one.
Exactly. It was all driven by his father's scientific career. Shizuo Ishiguro was a physical oceanographer, and he was invited to do research at the National Institute of Oceanography.
That's a fascinating detail. A physical oceanographer, a scientist who studies vast, deep, constantly shifting bodies of water.
The perfect metaphor, isn't it?
It almost sounds like a metaphor for memory and identity in his own work.
It certainly fits. He was 5, so he was old enough to have absorbed Japanese language and customs. But he wasn't old enough for that culture to define his formal education. That was all British.
But here's the detail that just solidifies everything, the thing that really explains the dislocation.
The fact that he did not return to visit Japan until 1989.
30 years.
Nearly 30 years later.
I mean, think about the significance of that gap. He grows up in England, he gets British citizenship in 1983, yet for the first 3 decades of his life, his memory of Japan is just fixed.
It can't be updated by reality. It's a time capsule.
Exactly. And this cultural insulation is what shaped him as a writer.
He spoke about it, saying that growing up in a Japanese family in the UK was crucial because it gave him this inevitable distance, a different perspective from his English peers.
He was a British Asian author whose lens was fixed internally. He was constantly comparing the world he saw in Britain to this preserved Japanese world in his head.
And this distance, this frozen memory, it leads to this incredible revelation about his first 2 major novels, A Pale View of Hills and An Artist of the Floating World.
Both of which are famously set in post-war Japan.
Yes, and he confessed this to another Nobel laureate, the celebrated Japanese writer Kenzaburo Trai.
What did he say?
He admitted that the Japanese settings he wrote about were entirely imaginary.
Why?
He wasn't writing documentary history. He said he was building up this picture in his head, an imaginary Japan. It was a literary construct built from, intense emotional ties and childhood memories, but completely divorced from contemporary reality.
That profoundly changes how you read those early novels.
It does.
You're not reading about Japan, you're reading about the idea of Japan, filtered through memory and guilt and distance.
And that makes the themes instantly universal, even with the specific backdrop.
Mm-hmm.
It also underscores his statement that he has, and I quote, little familiarity with Japanese writing, and that his works bear little resemblance to Japanese fiction.
So his reference points were somewhere else. If not Japanese prose, what was the key influence for those early works?
Film. He was a serious cinephile from a young age, and he pointed specifically to Japanese films.
Not novels.
Not novels. Directors like Yasujiro Ozu, who was known for these masterful, restrained family dramas, and the Mikio Naros, who focused so intensely on the inner lives of women. They provided the visual and atmospheric scaffolding.
That makes perfect sense. If you're writing about a place you can't physically revisit, you have to prioritize emotional tone and atmosphere, which is what film does so brilliantly.
Right. You can't provide the gritty, current socioeconomic details that a contemporary novelist living there might. So his early novels become these explorations of universal human states, guilt, denial, the failure of old ideals, all housed in the framework of an isolated memory.
It gave him the distance he needed. He could write about this profound Japanese moral reckoning, but from a position of detached, British-inflected psychological observation.
It's a synthesis of memory and fiction into something truly, truly unique.
It's incredible how detached he was from the Japan he wrote about. But that ability to filter life through an internal, emotional lens, it connects perfectly to his very earliest ambition, doesn't it?
Music.
Music. Before he was the critically lauded novelist with the corduroy jacket, Ishiguro was aiming for the rock stage.
He was intensely focused on it as a teenager. And his favorites, they weren't just the popular hits. He gravitated toward these deeply literate singer-songwriters.
Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen,
Joni Mitchell. Artists defined by their lyrical complexity and their intimate first-person narration. So he started learning guitar and writing songs with a really serious professional goal.
And this wasn't just a teenage phase, right? He took it seriously.
Oh, very. He took a gap year after school in 1973, which sounds like something straight out of one of his novels.
What did he do?
He traveled through the U.S. and Canada, writing a journal, trying to find his artistic voice, and crucially, sending demo tapes to record companies.
And wasn't there another much stranger job he had during that time?
Yes. And if you need a dose of historical absurdity, during that same gap year, he worked as a grouse beater at Balmoral Castle.
Wait. A future Nobel laureate. The man whose prose is praised for its elegant restraint was literally employed chasing birds for sport at the Queen's Scottish residence.
That's right.
That sounds like a scene from The Unconsoled, where reality is just slightly too bizarre to be true.
It really does. And I think it suggests this genuine, maybe slightly desperate search for direction. The contrast between trying to be this cool, lyrical musician while getting paid to flush grouse out of the heather. It perfectly encapsulates the tension between aspiration and reality that defines so many of his characters.
Ultimately, though, the music path didn't materialize. He didn't become the musician type.
No. He reflected on it later and he realized, I used to see myself as some sort of musician type, but there came a point when I thought, actually, this isn't me at all. I'm much less glamorous.
I'm one of these people with corduroy jackets with elbow patches.
Exactly. He pivoted. But the pivot wasn't a rejection of music. It was a transmutation of its principles into prose.
And that is the truly fascinating part. He said there's a big overlap between fiction and song, and that his novel style comes substantially from songwriting.
He's been very explicit about it.
So what exactly did he take from songwriting and bring into his literary craft?
Two things, primarily. First, that intimate perspective. The intimate first-person quality of a singer performing to an audience.
Which is why almost all his novels are narrated by a single internal voice speaking directly to the reader.
It creates this trust, but it's a trust you're often placing in a deeply unreliable narrator.
Right. Like a singer who sounds sincere, but when you really listen to the lyrics, you realize they're being incredibly defensive or evasive.
Precisely. And that leads to the second, and I'd argue most important, principle. The technique of obliqueness.
Obliqueness.
He realized that in a lyric or a novel, you have to approach meaning subtly, sometimes by nudging it into the spaces between the lines. The core emotional truth can't be stated directly. It has to be implied or withheld.
That explains so much. It's why his narrators, like Stevens the butler in The Remains of the Day, are masters of eloquent evasion. The real emotion, the love, the regret, the missed opportunity, it's all hidden in the gaps, in the things Stevens refuses to say.
It's storytelling built around performance and omission. And it forces you, the reader, into this active relationship with the text. You're not just consuming a story, you're constantly trying to solve the mystery of what the narrator is hiding.
Often from themselves.
Often from themselves. And this musical discipline is what made his prose so recognizable and so impactful.
And while he was wrestling with all this, he was also cementing his literary foundation academically.
He was. He got his BA in English and philosophy from the University of Kent. But the pivotal moment was attending the University of East Anglia's creative writing course for his MA in 1980.
And he was studying under some real heavyweights there.
Oh, yeah. Malcolm Bradbury, a key figure in British post-war fiction, and Angela Carter, who was famous for her, fantastical and often subversive feminist fairy tales.
What a combination.
That mix of structural rigor and radical imagination clearly had an influence. And his MA thesis, the manuscript he worked on there, became his first published novel, A Pale View of Hills.
So the transition was complete.
From aspiring Bob Dylan to serious, structurally disciplined novelist, it was complete.
So now we move into the first major phase of his career where he just rapidly establishes the core themes that would eventually lead to the Nobel Prize.
And this period saw him nominated for the Booker Prize 4 times. It was an incredible run.
The debut, A Pale View of Hills in '82, was followed by An Artist of the Floating World in 1986.
And these two novels are such a powerful pair. They're both set in his imaginary Japan, and they're intensely focused on memory and moral reckoning in the aftermath of immense national failure.
Let's talk about An Artist of the Floating World. It won the Whitbread Prize, and it's set in an unnamed Japanese city during the Allied occupation after World War II.
The narrator is Masuji Ono, a retired artist who had tremendous cultural influence before the war. But now he's facing the reality that the fiercely nationalistic, militaristic ideals he promoted through his art are utterly discredited.
It's that shock of realizing your life's purpose was fundamentally flawed. Ono's entire identity was built on promoting an ideal that led to catastrophic defeat.
And the central conflict is just beautiful in its sadness and restraint. The older generation, represented by Ono, is forced into this painful, subtle reevaluation, constantly being criticized by the younger generation.
And this is what Ishiguro found so compelling about post-war settings, right? Not just in Japan, but later in England, too.
Exactly. He said he's interested in that moment when values and ideals are being tested and people are compelled to face up to the notion that their ideals weren't quite what they thought they were.
That's the emotional force the Nobel Academy was talking about, that shockwave of disillusioned realization.
And the genius of it is how he manages this profound critique through a voice that is so reserved and polite and often defensive. Ono is constantly trying to smooth over his past, making excuses, rearranging events in his mind.
It's that songwriting obliqueness coming through again.
Absolutely. The reader knows more than the narrator admits. We see the truth even as he avoids saying it, and that creates this tremendous dramatic irony and psychological tension.
Then came the novel that just completely shattered any perception that Ishiguro was only a chronicler of Japanese cultural aftermath.
The Remains of the Day, 1989.
He proved Salman Rushdie right, didn't he? He showed his sensibility wasn't rooted in any one place.
It was an audacious shift. He moved the setting entirely to this quintessential English lord's country house, Darlington Hall, around World War II. But the core themes, they remain perfectly consistent.
We have Stevens, the quintessentially repressed English butler. His whole life is a pursuit of professional dignity, which led him to serve a master who was, frankly, a moral fool and a Nazi sympathizer.
It's the same emotional story. A life devoted to a magnificent but ultimately morally bankrupt ideal. Where Ono the artist used his creative influence for the wrong cause, Stevens the butler used his professional rigor for the wrong master.
And his ability to capture the nuance and linguistic restraint of a culture, the English servant class, that he'd only absorbed through observation and fiction is just, it's astonishing.
The restraint in the prose is a perfect mirror of Stevens's own emotional repression.
There are all those moments where he's discussing how to properly polish silver when what he should be discussing is his desperate love for Miss Kenton, the housekeeper.
It's the ultimate expression of obliqueness. Stevens narrates his life as a series of professional achievements, but what he's really narrating is a life of utter emotional failure.
And that narrative mechanism is terrifyingly effective.
It is. The novel won the Booker Prize for Fiction in 1989, solidifying his place globally.
And its impact was magnified by that acclaimed 1993 film adaptation.
With Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson. Yes, a critical and box office success. And the film brilliantly translated the novel's internal psychological drama to the screen, which is notoriously difficult to do.
So this whole early period, it's about him establishing his signature.
That constrained, first-person retrospective narration focused on a protagonist performing this intricate act of self-delusion while reviewing a life of failure. It was the launching pad for his next, even more radical phase.
Okay, so once he's established as a master of period and psychological drama, Ishiguro does the exact opposite of what most highly successful authors do.
He refuses to stay comfortable.
He takes massive structural and generic risks. This next phase is just defined by that willingness to experiment.
It starts with his fourth novel, The Unconsoled, in 1995. And it's arguably his most radical work.
He completely abandoned the linear, historically grounded narrative of his first 3 books.
Completely. It's set in an unnamed Central European city, and it follows this renowned concert pianist named Ryder, who arrives to perform, but finds himself trapped in this confusing, frustrating, dreamlike landscape.
Causalities are broken, time is elastic.
It sounds like the perfect definition of a book that divides critics.
Right. It's one thing to shift settings, but shifting reality itself, that's a massive risk.
Yeah.
Did it alienate his core audience that loved the elegant restraint of The Remains of the Day?
It absolutely divided critics. Some found the experiment baffling, overly long.
Yeah.
It defies any kind of logical summary. But it won the Cheltenham Prize. And its enduring power was confirmed when, in a 2006 poll of literary critics, The Unconsoled was voted the 3rd best British, Irish, or Commonwealth novel from 1980 to 2005.
Wow. Tied with masterpieces like Midnight's Children and Atonement.
Exactly. That speaks to its lasting influence, despite its difficulty. It proves the themes, the pressure of expectation, the failure to connect, were still intensely relatable, even if the world felt absurd.
He followed that with When We Were Orphans in 2000, which was a kind of detective story, also shortlisted for the Booker.
But the major stylistic shift that brought him back to widespread commercial and critical consensus came in 2005.
Never Let Me Go. This is the one that proved he could take the constraints of science fiction and infuse them with his trademark psychological depth.
It's a genius piece of misdirection. It has what you'd call science fiction qualities, but it's completely devoid of gadgets or space travel or laser beams.
Right. It creates a futuristic dystopian tone, but it's set in the 1980s and 90s in a sort of parallel world.
Focused on the lives of young clones being raised specifically for organ donation.
And the tragedy is just baked in from the start. These characters, especially the narrator, Kathy H., they understand their finite purpose, but they accept it with this quiet, heartbreaking dignity.
And that's the key. Ishiguro explores what it means to live a limited, predetermined life, but he tells it using the emotional language of an English boarding school drama. The focus is always on the small, quiet dramas of their friendships and loves, not the mechanics of the cloning.
It's the ultimate example of obliqueness applied to dystopia. The horror isn't shouted, it's just accepted as the background noise of life.
The critical acclaim was massive. Time magazine named it the best novel of 2005 and put it on their list of the 100 best English-language novels.
And it was at the center of a well-known Booker controversy that year, wasn't it?
It was. It was shortlisted, and a leaked account from the judging committee revealed this really heated debate between Never Let Me Go and John Banville's The Sea. The fact that a genre-bending book caused such intense division shows how much he was pushing boundaries.
And despite the loss, it was adapted into a major film in 2010, which really reinforced its cultural staying power.
And he continued this move into genre with his next novel, The Buried Giant, in 2015, diving headlong into modern Arthurian and mythic fiction.
Ogres, dragons, a mysterious mist that causes communal amnesia.
And this one stands out for a technical reason. One that shows his willingness to ditch his signature style when the story needs it.
Right. Nearly all his major novels are written in that intimate first-person narrative style he got from songwriting.
But The Buried Giant is the singular exception. It is not written in the first person. He just jettisoned the technique that made him famous to tell this story.
And that willingness to take risks with narrative form, even late in his career, is precisely why the Swedish Academy would later call him a continuous innovator. So all of this structural risk-taking and thematic consistency It eventually culminates in the monumental recognition, the 2017 Nobel Prize in Literature.
It was considered a surprise choice by many observers at the time.
But that citation we mentioned at the start, it just perfectly justifies the decision on a thematic level.
It's the intellectual cornerstone of his legacy. Novels of great emotional force, uncovering the abyss beneath our illusory sense of connection with the world.
And the critics, they largely rallied around the decision. John Mullen of The Guardian was quick to call him a worthy winner because, he said, Ishiguro writes for all times.
Writing for all times. That speaks to the universality of his subjects. Guilt, memory, denial.
Social conformity.
And it was powerful to see the recognition from his peers, too. Salman Rushdie offered many congratulations to my old friend Ish, whose work I've loved and admired.
Ishiguro's own response was characteristically humble, but also very insightful.
He called it a magnificent honor, of course, but he also made this vital connection between literature and the geopolitical climate at the time. He hoped the Nobel Prizes would be a force for something positive in the world at a very uncertain time.
Suggesting that art and the human condition it explores has to be separated from political tribalism.
To really understand the critical consensus, we have to look at how the Swedish Academy, specifically the permanent secretary Sarah Danius, positioned him within the broader literary tradition.
This is where it gets really interesting.
She presented this fascinating, almost paradoxical literary lineage. On one hand, she compared his meticulous, socially aware prose to 19th century giants.
Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, Charlotte Bronte,
George Eliot, masters of social observation, moral inquiry, and this very controlled, formal narrative voice.
That's a perfect connection for the world of Stevens in The Remains of the Day, a world where every detail is in its proper place, governed by social rules.
Exactly. The focus on dignity, manners, the subtle workings of the class system.
Yeah.
But Danius didn't stop there.
No.
She said that this classical 19th century tradition was mixed with influences from Franz Kafka.
Which is a fascinating dichotomy. 19th century control applied to 20th century anxiety.
That's a great way to put it. Kafka is the master of modern alienation, existential anxiety, and this absurd, incomprehensible institutional power. And if you think about it, Ishiguro's characters are often meticulous, polite people trying desperately to conform within systems that are fundamentally meaningless or hostile.
You see that tension everywhere. The extreme politeness of the clones in Never Let Me Go, trying to live normal lives in a system that has decided they're expendable.
Or the utter narrative breakdown and surreal frustration of the main character in The Unconsoled. It is the ultimate literary fusion. The careful, restrained prose of Austen applied to the soul-crushing, bureaucratic absurdity of Kafka.
So Danius called him an innovator, always taking risks.
Noting how he mixed elements of detective stories, science fiction, and myth. Her conclusion was powerful. While the window of the novel has always been wide, Ishiguro has widened it even more. He proved the novel can absorb any genre without sacrificing its high literary ambition.
And following the Nobel, Ishiguro just kept exploring new frontiers. His 8th novel, Clara and the Sun, published in 2021.
This shows him returning to those core themes of technology, humanity, and connection, but through a new, highly detached lens.
The entire novel is narrated from the perspective of Clara, an artificial friend, or AF.
It's a subtle but really effective mechanism. By choosing a non-human artificial entity to narrate, he's able to examine what it means to be human, the dangers of technological advancement, and how we view individual uniqueness, or, the soul.
Clara's narrative voice is extremely clear, observant, but emotionally innocent. It's almost like a child's perspective, even though she's a highly advanced machine.
And that forces the reader to filter these complex human emotions, love, jealousy, fear of replacement, through her non-judgmental, logical, but flawed understanding.
It's the highest expression of his obliqueness. You're forced to interpret human foibles through this technological distance.
The novel was longlisted for the 2021 Booker Prize, showing he's still at the top of his game. But critics often described it as more simple than it seems, less novel than parable.
And that simplicity feels very deliberate, doesn't it? A parable aims for a clear moral lesson.
And by having Clara focus so purely on the welfare of her human, Josie, and the mysterious power of the sun as this kind of divine energy source, he delivers a moral lesson about the non-mechanical nature of the human spirit.
While he was focusing on AI in his prose, he was also making this major professional turn towards screenwriting.
Something that connects right back to his lifelong interest in film, which we noted was a major influence on his early work.
And this resulted in the 2022 British film Living, directed by Oliver Hermanus and starring the phenomenal Bill Nighy.
What's truly elegant about this project is his choice of source material. He didn't adapt one of his own novels.
Yeah.
He adapted a deeply revered classic, the 1952 Japanese film Ikiru, directed by the master Akira Kurosawa.
That is a full-circle moment that is almost too perfect to be true.
It really is. He goes from being influenced by Japanese cinema ozu, Nehru's in his early novels, to adapting Kurosawa's masterpiece into a British context for the screen.
The adaptation itself is a fascinating study in cultural translation. Ikiru is about a Japanese bureaucrat who learns he's dying and dedicates his final months to overcoming bureaucracy to build a park.
And Ishiguro took that story of bureaucratic stifling and moral awakening and transposed it perfectly to the stiff, post-war English civil service of the 1950s.
So the Japanese moral inquiry about a life wasted on paperwork becomes the English moral inquiry about a life wasted on stoicism and endless formalities.
And this adaptation brought him significant multi-platform accolades. Living earned him a nomination for the 2023 Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay,
Which is a monumental achievement for a Nobel laureate. It places him in an extremely elite group.
only 6 prior to him. And the list of people who have won both a Nobel and an Oscar is incredibly short. Just 2.
George Bernard Shaw and Bob Dylan.
Exactly. Ishiguro's nomination places him shoulder to shoulder with these incredible, genre-defying cultural figures. He also earned 2 BAFTA nominations for the screenplay.
And the interest in adapting his own novels continues. A Pale View of Hills is slated for 2025, and Clara and the Sun is also upcoming. His work is just timeless. We started by discussing his failed ambition to become a performing songwriter and how the lessons of lyricism became the technique of his prose.
But the music never truly left him. In fact, he found a second career as a successful, award-nominated lyricist.
He found the perfect collaborative outlet in contemporary jazz.
He has co-written several songs with the acclaimed American jazz singer Stacey Kent and her husband, the saxophonist and composer Jim Tomlinson.
And this wasn't just a one-off thing, it's an extensive partnership that spanned decades.
He became a serious lyrical contributor. He co-wrote titles like The Ice Hotel, I Wish I Could Go Traveling Again, and the title track for Kent's 2007 Grammy-nominated album, Breakfast on the Morning Tram.
And later contributions like The Summer We Crossed Europe in the Rain.
This partnership is the practical, physical manifestation of his lyrical philosophy. He reiterated that for an intimate first-person song, the meaning must be oblique.
You have to read between the lines.
It's the same process as reading an Ishiguro novel. The meaning is hiding just beneath the surface of the words. He explicitly credits this realization with having an enormous influence on his fiction.
The novelist and the lyricist are undeniably two sides of the same coin, both masters of subtext.
And the themes of his lyrics often mirror his novels. Travel, regret, the quiet yearning for connection, the weight of memory. Their introspective narratives set to music.
You know, I find his personal life details equally telling about his influences and the deep empathy in his novels. He married Lorna McDougall, a social worker, in 1986.
And where they met is particularly insightful. They met while he was working as a residential resettlement worker at a homelessness charity in Notting Hill.
This experience of direct engagement with the societal margins, with people who have lost their connection to the world, it must have informed the deep moral seriousness in his fiction.
It's no wonder he's so concerned with dignity, social roles, and the ways people cope when they're seen as expendable. You see it from The Remains of the Day right through to Never Let Me Go.
And it's a literary family, too. Their daughter, Naomi Ishiguro, is also an author.
Reinforcing that creative environment.
And finally, we can use his own stated influences to summarize the duality of his work, the modern storyteller and the classical giant.
He describes himself as a serious cinephile, and going back to his teenage idol, a great admirer of Bob Dylan. When he was on the essential British radio program Desert Island Discs, his choices perfectly encapsulated his artistic range.
What were those specific choices?
He chose Dylan's Trying to Get to Heaven as his favorite song. That's the oblique, emotive musical modernism.
And for his book?
The collected short stories of Anton Chekhov.
The master of quiet, devastating psychological realism.
So you have the musicality of Dylan alongside the psychological truth of the Russian master.
And he also settles the debate about his all-time favorite novelist. He says Charlotte Bronte has recently edged out Dostoevsky.
Which is a powerful preference. It's a preference for intense emotional intimacy over grand philosophical scope. He said he owes his career to Jane Eyre and Villette.
So a focus on the internal psychological world, which perfectly aligns with his own narrative preference for these deeply complex, often damaged first-person narrators.
To conclude the story of this genre-defining career, we should just briefly summarize the immense formal recognition that cemented his status, both in the UK and internationally.
Beyond the literary prizes, the Booker, the Nobel, the UK has continuously recognized his services to literature. He was appointed an OBE in 1995, and then, after the Nobel, he was made a Knight Bachelor in 2018.
And most recently, in 2024, he was appointed to the prestigious Order of the Companions of Honor, which is limited to just 65 living members.
His birthplace, Japan, also recognized his immense cultural achievement, awarding him the Order of the Rising Sun in 2018.
And France had acknowledged him even earlier, back in 1998. But what's perhaps most telling about his trajectory is how early the literary establishment spotted his talent.
He was featured in Granta's Best Young British Novelists issues in both 1983 and 1993.
A sign that he was viewed as a foundational voice for 2 consecutive decades.
The Times ranked him 32nd on their list of the 50 greatest British writers since 1945. And yet, despite all the comparisons to Henry James, to Austen, to Rushdie Ishiguro himself, consistently rejects them,
preferring to credit that unique combination of Charlotte Brontë and Franz Kafka.
And that really is the final synthesis we have to leave you with. An author who uses classical constraints and structured prose, filtered through a musician's trained ear for subtext and omission,
to explore the most modern and painful themes of dislocation, disillusionment, and failure. He mastered the historical setting he barely knew, perfected the psychological drama of the English elite, and then jumped seamlessly into sci-fi and myth, all while maintaining that core emotional force.
He is a chameleonic genius who forces us to look past the surface of the world we inhabit and reckon with the internal failures we try so desperately to conceal.
We've seen Ishiguro move fluidly from historical fiction set in the land he barely knew to sci-fi dystopia and classical screenwriting adaptations, always using constraint to reveal profound emotional truths. If his greatest works focus on characters who must confront the failure of their old ideals, and if he finds deep meaning in the subtle spaces between the lines of a song, what unseen abyss beneath your own seemingly stable sense of connection might his next work prompt you to uncover?
What is the unseen truth hiding in your most familiar world?
A compelling and essential question to ponder.
We encourage you to explore his deeply structured and incredibly rewarding works further, particularly The Remains of the Day and Never Let Me Go if you haven't already. That was the deep dive.